Hi, and welcome to the FincTank. This week we're talking to Matt Tataryn. I wanted Matt on the podcast today because he first came onto my radar when he first joined Tide in 2019. It was the role that everyone was talking about, and then this guy out the blue from Santander comes in and gets it. It, for me, was an unusual hire because you're not the usual fintech pedigree. So we kind of have been aware of each other for a very long time, I'd say, and then we met, gosh, it was actually properly this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's probably 6 months ago now, which is really strange because I feel like we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe like faces on screens. I think it's like the LinkedIn syndrome. And maybe after COVID, it gets even worse. But yeah, it feels strange to say we've only known each other 6 months. But as you say, like within the market in different places, it's probably been a lot longer.
It's been a lot longer. And actually, when we first met, we were just vibing.
Yeah, and
away.
we know like so many people so closely intertwined. It's like going through a weird family tree.
Yeah, literally.
Of like how we're connected in so many different ways.
Yeah, but isn't that fincrime community like completely all over? Everyone seems to know everyone, and if you don't really know anyone.
Yeah, I would say a family tree is a good way to explain how fincrime is. It's, everyone has, that person in the family they don't like, the person that they love, the cousin that they go and see at an event and have fun with. I think, that's probably the best way to explain how it has grown. And I think it's so nice as well how you just see it keep expanding, like conference after conference, year after year, new faces, old faces, people in different positions, different companies. But yeah, it's quite a wholesome area.
But the weaving together, I actually call it incestuous, guys, which is probably a less polite way of saying what I'm saying. But also the weaving together of fintech and banking now. Like you were just talking about conferences then. The FFE Con that we went, the FinTrail conference, which everyone needs to go to, used to be really fintech and payments. It used to just be like everyone went to that one. And then the banking guys went to like First Line of Defense or ICA conference or something like that. But we're seeing a lot more of the coming together of the sectors. And I think it's because people like you from banking over the last 8 years maybe have started moving more into payments and fintech. When you choose what conferences to go to, are you specifically targeting the payments ones or are you going to the big ones as well?
I think it's a blend. So I would say, a lot of conferences that I'll go to, I'll either be speaking or I'll be on a panel. It was really refreshing to go to FFE Con and just enjoy the day. Yeah. And sometimes when you're on panels and things like that, you can be a bit of a target for people to come and speak to and things of that nature, which, in some senses is nice if you're building your profile. But for me, who probably prefers a bit of a lower profile, kind of stay out of the way sometimes. Yeah. And FFE Con this year was the first conference I've been to in a long time, probably about 8-9 months. I think a lot of people said to me, where have you been hiding? What's been happening? Where have you gone? And it was so nice, as I say, to see so many familiar faces, but also I was blown away by how many people were there. Yeah. Like, as you say, different sectors, different speakers, even different vendors. It sounds like a strange thing. I think maybe the blow up of PSR and APP fraud has changed where vendors sit, who looks after what. I've just been at an event with the Payments Association. It's like Pay360's next, then there's FRC, and then there's multiple more. So I think it can be a bit of a minefield to pick the right ones. Yeah. But I would say instead of picking like the right ones, pick the reasons why you're going. Yeah. If you're going to network, find the speakers that you want to talk to and go and pick them out. If you're going to learn something, find the topics that you enjoy. Just remember your time is valuable, right? Don't go for the ones that have the best lunch. Just go for the ones that you're going to get some value from.
But it is true. And the reason I was kind of asking you about how you pick your conferences is I know that you are so much of a champion of people coming into the sector, growing their network and at the younger stages of their career. I just wanted to go back to when you first got into fincrime because people don't know how to do it, how to get started. And your earlier roles was kind of first line, which is unusual to see that you've moved into. We'll get onto your career now shortly. But how did you first get your first role at Barclays?
So I started on their graduate program. So this was, a long time ago now, 12, 15 years ago. Leaving school, had no idea what I wanted to do.
What did you study?
I studied business management, which I didn't even want to study. So I got played by my mother into going to university. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wrote down that I was going to go to Warwick and I was going to do law, one of the best law schools in the country. totally missed out the fact that you have to be slightly academic to be able to get the grades to get in. So didn't qualify, went into whatever the pooling is to go to different courses. And my mum, who worked for Barclays for 35 years, she said, well, why don't you put the graduate scheme down as a backup? You don't need a backup. You'll be fine. Ambitious young Matt, you'll get what you want, but maybe just have a backup.
Yeah.
So then that backup came reality, and that was retail banking. So I started a year at university, and then I went on to doing 6 months working, so different rotations within retail banking. Started as a cashier, into a personal banker, assistant manager, and sort of fell then into much bigger pools of working with people and just understanding, what working life is. I think a graduate program to me was an amazing way to enter the working world. It gave me something to look forward to, going back to uni every 6 months and seeing my friends, as well as something to get up into the morning for. Really understanding of what working life is. In the banking sector, and certainly retail banking, I'm sure most people who have been in that sphere, it's quite an aging population. So you learn a lot of good things that probably people don't teach you at university and others, working with different age groups, different cultures. It taught me a lot, how to work with different people from a customer perspective, and just your communication style and what not to do and what gets you into a lot of trouble if you do those things, and understanding it. And I fell into working in a big branch in Sheffield. So I was the assistant manager at one of the largest branches in Barclays. Total potluck, but then just sort of went through that cycle of looking what I want to do next. And Barclays went through this massive digitalization in probably 2012, 2013, around there. And I realized that retail banking wasn't for me. I didn't want to be customer facing. I wanted to go into something that was more exciting, getting away from dealing with everybody's problems all the time. So I looked at an option of fraud, and then moved into their fraud department, became a team leader in their fraud operations. So looking after what was then plastic and non-plastic fraud. So card transactions, and then the tiny population of online banking and mobile banking. It's amazing, like mental to think that 10 years ago, Barclays were just launching a mobile banking app. And
what?
Yeah, we stood there. I remember speaking to all of the teams of how do we get more people to bank digitally? How do we get people to sign up to mobile banking?
Forgive me, because I was just arriving in this great country around that time. So in New Zealand, we've always had, it's been a really online money culture. So was Barclays a slow adopter, or were all the banks a little bit slow?
No, they were one of the first, right? So,
what?
They had a massive focus on digitalization.
Yeah.
And actually the retail banking thing really connects now to what I do of, in AML and financial crime, because working in a branch is like first line, like true first line.
Totally, yeah.
Sitting on a cashier desk and somebody coming and paying in £10,000 in cash, or somebody wanting to withdraw £25,000. And you used to have this lovely form that you'd fill out if you were slightly suspicious, and you post it off. And it moved very quickly. So it started with, you had online banking, mobile banking, and then there was sort of the cashier desk that they turned into the assisted service sort of terminals. It used to be, when I was a personal banker, that, very much back in the day, they don't do this anymore. You were incentivized. If you open a mobile banking, you open an online banking, you get a bonus for that, a pound or 50p on your salary. And it was a real push to do that. And then it just exploded.
Yeah,
I think when there's a huge amount of friction in the market when they started taking away cashiers, and it was then you got to pay in with a machine.
We still hear it now. If anyone ever read the Daily Mail, you'd think that the whole country's up in arms still about it, but no one particularly cares.
Well, I think so. This was maybe one of the other reasons why I left banking. There's 3 reasons why people go into a bank, or from my experience, 3 reasons why people go into a bank. They're old and it's a routine, and they like to get out and see people, and they go and take their cash out because that's how they pay for everything. It's been their life for years. So the aging population. They're new into the country, and they need to set up a bank account for housing, students, things like that. Sheffield was a huge student population, so it was massive. Of when you come to a new country, how do you open a bank account? Well, you go to the local bank and you take your ID and you pay your check-in, and that's it. So you deal with huge amount of foreign individuals that are coming for whatever reason. And then the last one is people have a problem. So something's broken, something doesn't work. I need you to help me with something. It's an issue. So out of 2 of those 3 things, working with old people is lovely to a certain extent until they're the same person every day and the same conversation every day. And, you know, maybe my social skills aren't quite tuned to doing that every single day. The, you know, student element of that was just chaos.
Yeah.
You know, we had queues down the street of students wanting to open accounts.
I bet they were so rude as well. No offense, students. I'm sure you're not all rude, but I bet it wasn't the most pleasant kind of...
A lot of people didn't even speak English, right?
Yeah.
You know, people are coming over from colleges and schools for the first time, exchange students who are coming to, you know, learn the culture, learn the language, you know, really struggle, have no idea what you're doing,
How
right?
bewildering for them as well. Like, don't speak the language. Imagine me going to set up a bank account in India. I wouldn't know where the foggiest place to start. So a lot of explaining needed, I imagine.
Opposite, right? So we used to have a queue down the road, and there used to be 12 of us as a maximum of personal bankers in Sheffield. It used to be across 2 floors, and it used to be in, out, in, out, in, out. And we would do in, you know, an hour, 30, 40 accounts. And you would have 4 people sat around your desk, 4 pieces of ID, 4 mobile phones to set up their banking. And it was 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And we would work sort of through that period of where freshers was beginning and coming over. It would be, you know, 9 till 9, and we'd do pizzas in the banking hall after. And it was a real like camaraderie, big push, because there was just so many people.
So much work to be done.
In Sheffield, there's 2 universities. You know, go to other big cities, 2 universities that are bringing in, you know, X thousand students each semester, and you've got 2 weeks to do it. It was chaos. So, yeah, you know, maybe not the most enjoyable second one, and then the third one. Well, everybody's got a problem, right? You know, how many times can you take being shouted at in the banking hall because somebody can't log in on their app online?
Oh my God! And people, I wouldn't do this ever. But, you know, when you're frustrated, it's who is at the receiving end, of course. Yeah. And, you know, when you were talking about leading the fraud team, when they were kind of digitizing it, did they speak to you about the pain points? You know how these days fraud, transaction monitoring, sanction screening, talk to tech and product all the time. Was it like that? Or were you very much like, this is what we're rolling out and this is what your team needs to do?
It might as well have been a different business.
Right.
You know, and I think the educational piece now has transformed massively. From my experience of going back into banking then with Santander further in my career, there was definitely a huge amount of work that large high street banks, and I think, you know, public facing banks have done on making sure that all of their employees understand where they fit in a journey for financial crime and how they can benefit or change the process, you know. And when I moved into fraud, it made me then focus on ensuring that, you know, actually we are providing education. Actually, we are doing projects of what we're doing and how it complements what people are doing on the front line, and looking to try and improve that, and, you know, taking contacts from my early days and reworking with them and doing projects. Yeah, one thing I would say with Barclays, they had a great sort of scheme of getting you to do projects outside of your role.
Yes.
Like how you can benefit the business in another way, and giving you time to go into branches or do, you know, other digital channels and things of that nature. And it really helped you to network. You could really get in and see different areas. And I think, you know, ultimately that was why I enjoyed a lot of it. Yeah. You know, I really enjoyed my time at Barclays. There was not too many negatives, if I'm honest.
But also having that empathetic approach to what the first line is saying. Like, there's nothing worse than a compliance team who doesn't actually understand what's happening in front of them, and they're just layering policies and procedures on top of people that just simply don't work in practice. So you decided to move on to Barclays. Where did you decide to go? No,
so in Barclays, I went into fraud, and then I was headhunted to go to Amazon.
Yes.
Which was like a different world. I remember.
But when you went, though, it was like the boom of like people. Was that when they first brought on the click button, the buy now button? And there must just be.
They were doing everything.
Yeah.
Like they were talking about, we're going to have drones to deliver things. You know,
I laugh, but it's probably going to happen soon.
Yeah. They tried so hard, honestly. You know, the innovation there, and as a company, unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, as an experience to work for them, you know, I learned so much that I still put into practice now from operations, you know, how to run an operation, you know, how to scale at pace, how to do something different.
Well, I just want to go back to how you, obviously you got headhunted to go there, but what made you decide, because it's a hugely different business from going to Barclays. So what made you go, yeah, okay, I'm interested in interviewing. And then what did you kind of ask through the interview process that kind of really cemented it for you?
The first thing, it was Amazon. So that was like really exciting. Yeah. The second, it was a move to London. You know, I'd always had some form of vision that, you know, London is the place to be if you want to succeed in your career. And I think back then it was very prevalent that there was higher salaries in London. There was more opportunities in London. You know, I saw the dream, right? You know, you can go to the big city and you can now progress. And in a company that is very well established, you know, I have parents who when I go to different businesses or look at different businesses, like, well, how much did they make last year? Are they going to be here in 10 years' time? Are they stable? Like, the questions that you used to ask a long time back.
Yeah.
And they ticked all the boxes, right? And I went to the interview. I went to this wonderful, shiny office in, where is it? On the viaduct in Holborn, looking over the city.
Offices?
It was, yeah. That was the first office that I was at. And then they're now at Liverpool Street, Principal Place. And I walked in and I was like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I went through a pretty intense interview process. There was like 4 interviews, 30 minutes long, back to back. And I was blown away by, just the structure of it.
Was it in one day?
Yeah. It was.
Isn't that Amazon efficiency right there?
11 in the morning. That was it. Started, finished at 2:30. On your way, go home.
Any case studies? Like, who did you meet in that process?
So there was different levels. So one thing with Amazon is that they were and still are very sort of fond on their values, and their sort of core competencies and values. So it was a value-based interview of they take 2 values and they have 2 interviewers, different levels in the department. So where I was TRMS, so that was like transaction risk screening and monitoring, and it was, okay, our value is, I'm going to say the Tide values now because they're the only ones I remember, 1 team.
It's good you remember them.
Yeah, and then a question around, 1 team, what that looks like for you and how you would implement that at Amazon. And, these were people who were senior operations managers, they were team leads, there was different levels. Like, I think they do a very good job of their recruitment process.
Yeah.
Multiple different questions, looking for different underlying reasons, multiple different stakeholders, so you get a real feel for that. And went through that, 4 or 5 questions per interview. Tell me about yourself, what you want to do, where you want to go. And I think they look a lot for potential.
Yeah. Because you don't take this the wrong way, but you're fairly young to be a head of operations at that age.
Yeah. And especially into a team that was brand new.
Yeah. And how big was the team?
So when I started, it was 5. And when I left, it was 150 something.
Did you hire them?
Around that number. We went up very high and then it dropped lower down. There was like a real vision to expand the team massively. We went through this huge growth and then it was, okay, we need to scale it back a little bit. And then it transferred into another space. So it grew massively. There was me and one other team leader. Then there was 4 team leaders and then it just continued to expand.
Just while we're on it, how do you, early in your career, because it was part of the reason I wanted to get you on here, is you've always kind of led and managed teams very early in your career, which is something people typically to do later in their career. How have you found managing people older than yourself? How do you establish credibility? What's your leadership style?
I think to start with, it's very daunting. I'm now quite used to being the youngest in the room very often. It's actually starting to change now. I think this is showing my age. There are other people now. I'm quite
so
jealous.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh no, I'm not the youngest anymore. Like, why are they doing so well? But no, it's nice to see. But look, I've always been used to being the youngest in the room. I think banking as a retail banker, as I said, with an aging population, I was 19, 20 years old as assistant manager doing one-to-ones with people who were 55, 60 years old.
Do you think you're just like an old soul, or do you like I could not imagine that when I was 19, 20 years old.
Oh, back then I was like, I don't really know what to do here. But you just learn, right? Like, you can't do too much wrong, I think, in managing those
I've heard some horror stories.
I think it depends if you have a good relationship with those individuals, right?
Correct,
if you can build rapport and you understand each other and you know what is good and what is bad. And, I think management is all about making your style the other person's style. Like, if you have your own style and you think, well, it's my way or the highway, I'm going to manage like this, you will divide people very quickly. And, maybe divide and conquer is needed sometimes, but I think tailoring your style to the person you're working with to get the best from them, because ultimately if you get the best from them, it's the best for you.
That's your job done, right?
You're going to succeed. Just understanding and being respectful, right? There's a lot that I can learn from all of these individuals that I'm managing. My point there is to get the best out of them. It's not really about me. So I think just from a very early age, I sort of learned to have that level of respect, appreciate that there's a lot that I can learn from people and, get that from them. And I really enjoyed it. Like, I remember when I was at Amazon doing hiring and then at Santander and now at Tide hiring people, looking for that diversity in your team of people who have had lots of experience that maybe don't fit the cultural mold but want to learn. They add so much value to you and the team.
Yep.
And it was really exciting. Amazon was probably very different to Barclays because the age gap was a lot closer. You know, a lot of people who worked at Amazon were much younger, sort of people earlier in their careers, people who you're very ambitious in London. I think until you got to a much more senior level, you know, analysts, team leaders and things of that nature were probably in a similar age bucket to me. I think the social side I found quite hard. You know, when I was sort of 21 years old, and the people who are your level that you're supposed to sort of socialize with and outside of work have got, you know, families and houses and things, and I'm new to the city. I think that was quite hard. I think I felt like I connected a lot more with analysts in my team from a social perspective, and that can sometimes have, you know, challenges of how you manage people as friends and things of that nature. And, you know, I look at my friends now and people who I still am connected to from Amazon. They're not the people who were managers or the same level. It was the people that I worked with or managed. And I think I found that quite a shock when I first came to the city. Sounds really cliche to say came to the city.
Came to the big smoke.
Yeah, you know, up in the Midlands, it's a totally different world.
But I empathise with you, because when I first came to London, and actually for a very long time in London, most of my friends were work friends, because London's not the most open city. You don't just go to a bar and meet a stranger and you become friends with them. So you rely on those work networks. And I can understand how working with people and then going out for drinks with them and then having to manage them the next morning is a delicate balance.
I look back at it and I go, I was 21 years old in the middle of London in a bar with essentially unlimited drinks behind it with everybody you work with. Yeah. And you go, oh, that's working life. How does that not cause chaos?
I was so shocked at the drinking culture in London. I got to tell you, like, it blew my little socks off, my little Kiwi socks. I was like, wow. So you went back into banking.
Yeah, it felt like the right move. I think it was the right move. You know, Amazon served its purpose for me. It showed me the bigger picture. It showed me what it can do and where it is. But I think Amazon, and probably you see this with a lot of people who work for Amazon, can be quite absorbing. You know, once you're in, you know, it's that big. Where can you go? Where do you look to? And they have quite a competitive way of how financially they keep you involved with shares and things of that nature. And you end up in a position where your total compensation is very high, but it's based on like a share package.
Yes.
So then trying to leave as a salary at the same level is quite challenging. And, you know, although Amazon is a great place to have on your CV from like a cultural perspective, when you look at it as, okay, well, what do you actually do? It's a marketplace and a payments platform. It's not a bank. It's not a financial institute. You know, you're not working, yes, under the same regulator, but not in the same realms as what you do in a financial institute.
It's very operations heavy. And so like if I was to pull someone in to go into Barclays, I possibly wouldn't look at Amazon in particular areas of the business.
I was slightly not concerned, but I always had in the back of my mind of like, where does my career go after this? You know, I think if you get to a certain level in Amazon, you can progress very, very quickly. And then it's like, well, I've got to take a big step backwards to start again. I was there for 2.5 years, you know, saw the expansion, watched it grow, went through the great times, went through the bad times. And it was then time to look for a new opportunity. And it took me a long time. You know, the recruitment wheel of where I was at that level, I found really hard, you know.
Oh, it's like buses though. Like there'll be nothing, and then all of a sudden, the recruitment market does go in themes though. So I'm not surprised you just had to wait for the tide to roll in. And,
you know, I was watching people in my team go to, you know, investment banks and things of that nature, you know, analysts at that level.
I was about to say more junior people. There's always a need.
Yeah.
Whereas the senior, more strategic roles, it's almost there's got to be a new strategy, or someone has to leave, and it's often the one that people could try and cut money on as well.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day when you were moving sectors.
And then you're priced out, right?
Yes.
You know, you're looking at, okay, well, I need to earn X amount to be at the same level. You know, actually, I want to see it as a progression. What do I do? Look, I was applying everywhere, like absolutely everywhere.
But also age. Back when you were moving, when was it? 2019.
No, earlier. That was 2017.
2017. Yeah. Age would have been a factor. People definitely were looking for grey hairs to lead teams. Yeah. And I bet when you were asking for, hypothetically, I don't know, 80K, people are going, absolutely not. He's only got X amount of experience. And it is a really painful thing in recruitment as people look at years experience rather than what you've been doing. So you've been leading teams and building them and doing all this wonderful stuff, and people are saying, oh, he's got 6 years experience. It's not for us. He's up against this guy with 20 years experience who wants the same salary. Yeah.
Amazon's quite unique as well, right? Like, I don't think I can ever explain to anyone who's not worked for Amazon how hard it can be. Yeah. You know, I think now working for fintechs, I get it a lot more. I think people who work in fintechs probably understand it much more. But the pace of which it moves, like for such a large organization, the culture is still when I was there was still very much much closer to what Tide is of what I experienced at Tide versus anything I'd experienced in
efficiency
banking.
first, right?
Yeah, it was to get it done.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're here to do a job. We're here to get something complete, and the deadline is tomorrow, and that's it.
Do you know there's a fintech, a big one, who recently is getting their license, who I won't name. And apparently I've heard that they've got a policy that if you pitch an idea, it has to be able to be done in the quarter or you don't get it. And it's because they don't want people making these big, lofty, made up goals.
Yeah.
It just needs, if it's not business critical, it would get done in the quarter. And if it's not, it doesn't need to be done.
You can end up becoming so corporate without even thinking.
Yep.
You know, huge roadmaps, you know, 2-year plans, 3-year plans, where are we going to work back from, and others. And I think that was what, you know, for me with Tide, certainly in the early days and probably still now, right, is what motivates me is similar to that, right? It's still about just getting it done.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, Tide as a place to work works for some people, it doesn't for others, because, you know, the candidates and people that we probably look for experience-wise are in the, you know, 10, 15 years banking mold of what we've seen, but it needs to be someone who probably had a similar mindset to me of coming out of banking is, I'm here to go do it, not to here to hide.
Yeah.
And, you know, no offense to people who work in large financial institutes, there is a lot of people who hide and who have been in positions for the same years, doing the same things, not moving. And yeah, that's great for them. You know, that's probably what suits them in their life, and they maybe hit the position they want to, but that was never really the mindset I had. And I think I realized that when I went back into banking, that this isn't the place for me.
You did a cool role though.
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah.
So talk to us about that.
So I went back to work for Santander, part of building and expanding their financial crime academy, apprenticeship program, graduate scheme. So they basically were, and it's still to this day, like, love this model.
Yeah.
I would been begging and praying to do this model at Tide, and maybe through my own problem of making it too big, have never done it, but loved this model of taking people out of school at 16 years old, putting them on a rotation like I did at Barclays in the retail scheme, 6 months on KYC, 6 months on ongoing monitoring, 6 months on payment screening, 6 months on SARS. You've then got a population of people who have your culture, your training, your style, at a very low cost to the business, who now can go into different areas. Yeah. Yes, you're going to have a lot of wastage. You're taking kids from school, right? You know, how many questions can you ask them? What can they tell you of what they're going to do? Again, just looking hugely for potential of people that can progress into the business. But that is how you find future leaders. We should talk about it now, actually. The problem with upcoming talent and financial crime. There are so many functions moving out of London, like the transaction monitoring, sanction screening, everything. They're moving now to India. They're moving to Eastern Europe. I foresee a problem in 10 years' time where we're not going to have any training ground for people. It is, and you and I both know it's hard for people to move from first line to second line, but they still do it. And if we've got but if we're shrinking those teams, how on earth are we going to find the talent? Yeah, I think, look, it's generational, right? And not to get deep into Gen Zs, millennials, baby boomers and things of that nature. I think the one thing which has pushed companies to go to other jurisdictions is the cost now of what people expect in salaries in their first role or their second role in banking.
What do you reckon it is? I'll tell you, but what do you think? For a London KYC analyst.
I've seen some horrors, Jess.
Oh, don't agree with that.
You know, in recruit, like looking for different roles and people saying, you know, hiring an ongoing monitoring analyst or a SAR analyst, and I've got 2 years worth of experience and I want 55 grand.
Nailed it. It's mad. I completely empathise with the cost of living crisis and people being in the office. Like if you're looking at train tickets and people don't live in London or anything. But if a client asks me to find them a KYC analyst for under 25k, I can't.
I joined Tide on, joined Amazon on about 32,000.
Bargain
and I
for
thought
Amazon.
I was a king.
I bet.
I
bet you strutted around.
It was like, I'd like doubled my salary from going from Barclays to there. Because I went through that graduate program, right? So as a graduate, you know, you earn minimum wage, £13,000 a year. Yeah. You're doing an assistant manager job at whatever, 45, 50 grand. And then you come out of that program and they're like, well, you're on 13,000. We'll put you on 22. That's a massive jump, 50% increase. I was like, wow. And then Amazon go, okay, we'll pay 10 grand more. Yep. Okay, that's another 50%. I'm like, wow.
I'm skyrocketing here.
And then like, so when I see some of these expectations now, and maybe this is like I say, you know, show your age sometimes, and I look at it and I go, 55 grand. I could have got 2 of me for that.
Yeah. But I mean, it is different though. We were talking about the offshoring, it is the cost, but it's also the maturity of those markets, right? Like when you think about the markets in India, it was really just HSBC, for example, that had that big function out now.
Yeah.
Now all the banks do. And correct me if I'm wrong, people, but I think there's a campus where all the banks are pretty much. And so it's not even like you're going out there and you're hiring people for low salaries and you've got to train them and you've got to educate them on the UK banking. No, they all know.
And they're good.
Oh, they're fantastic.
Really good.
They are really fantastic. And actually, I've seen a trend of my workforce, my candidates coming back and forth between them, and they're phenomenal, particularly if you're looking at the tech and the product side of the tools.
Yeah.
So there is like the academy and things that you created over at Santander do need to happen. There's graduate schemes, like the brokerages are starting to do them, really FinCrime specific ones, which is really encouraging to see. But it's just how do you attract people to them? Because it's,
the big 4 still do them really well, right? Like they bring you in, they give you a great experience, and that's probably why, I was at PwC's office this morning for a payments association meeting, and what a place.
Yeah.
Like unbelievable building, like what they're doing.
Coming from like New Zealand or the Midlands or somewhere and just walking in, this is London.
Yeah.
Like,
that was my vision of London. Vision London and finance, right? This is the world. I remember it came from going to one CP, so Churchill Place for Barclays, and going to the office at Euston for Santander, and walking in there and just going, yeah, this is where I want to be.
I still good at going to the wharf now. Like, when you walk into the wharf and it's a day like this and it's a sunny day and the water's glistening and there's like professional people and you think, this is London.
Yeah.
Like this is the vibe. But I'm just wondering about the talent pools for the second line coming through.
Companies need to build apprenticeship programs, and it's dead easy. You get a lovely government subsidy that pays and supports you to put them through some form of qualification, whether it be ICA or ACAMS, whatever is available for people now. You get a great subsidy. You don't need to pay these people ridiculous amounts of money because their cost of living is reduced because they're living at home or things of that nature. If you move people to London, maybe subsidise that slightly with the London rate of what people can get. And maybe that needs to be looked at now with the cost of living. It's certainly not going to be as cheap as what it was in the past. And then give them experience. Yeah. Give them the wow factor of your business. Send them around different teams, work with different people, pair them up with your best people, spot the talent, and then retain it.
Yep.
I don't think it's a really difficult, thing to run. It needs a lot of time. It needs a lot of trust.
It's HR time intensive.
Yeah.
Recruiters don't like doing it because there's no money in it for us. We are greedy like that.
I'd have never known.
But yeah, it is. And so the Santander, that role completely evolved while you were there as well, right? So you made it your own.
It was. Yeah. And again, like just from a networking perspective, like, looking at where you can put teams of these people. So where can we help the business with 24 apprentices? Because I know that I've got a workforce that can learn something in 2 weeks. They're computer literate, so they're great with anything that you give them tech-wise. They can pick things up really quickly and they're eager to learn. So where can I get the most for the business and for them? So, going to corporate teams, executive teams, going to SAR teams, going to the MLRO and saying, look, I've got a team of people who can help. Santander as a company obviously is an amalgamation of so many different building societies and others, and they went through Transformation Project 1, Transformation Project 10, Transformation 25, and even just the year that I was there.
Yeah.
How can these people help? We've got huge remediations that were happening, paying contracting firms huge amounts of money, all these people on
not that much money.
Day rates, £250 a day to do a KYC file. I've got a team of people who are £10 a day that can do 3 files. Right? Like utilize them and give them then the experiences of where they can go. And, watching these apprentices roll off their academy, I've still got one working for us at Tide. I've still got other people in the market.
Coach the best, did you?
We hired. Yeah. I hope he sees it and then he'll know.
I'll tag him.
No, but there's many others that I still speak with or still, follow their journeys who are progressing into wonderful roles, and watching them roll off and go into agile positions or into SAR teams or into transformation teams and, going in as, a 19-year-old kid like I was and looking at this big world and going, well, now I've got a chance.
Yeah.
And that was so exciting. And, maybe Tide isn't quite big enough yet because you have to have the availability to give these people roles at the end of it.
And it's a time investment, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't want to just set them to the wolves. You want to be able to sit down and make something for them. That point that you made around like paying someone $250 a day to do the KYC files. We do in recruitment get a little bit frustrated when it's a really vanilla product and they ask us for a KYC analyst and they want to pay them 25 to 35K and they need them to have the product experience. And I think, you could get a really hungry, talented person who really wants to be there and really wants to learn the craft, but they just won't look at them. And it's a shift in the market that I've seen at all levels. Currently, people want someone who's done the job, not can do the job.
Yeah.
And it's a really costly way to recruit because you're paying top dollar for...
I think there is a certain level that if anybody commits to with a certain level of drive and just academic basic level can get to in a business. And I think now that's probably the sort of 65, 70K mark. I stand by this. I think if anybody gives me 5 years of their life from coming out with a qualification or when they first leave university and commit to doing the dirty work and getting there and putting the effort in and learning and spending the hours like, I did, that you can get to 70K in 5 years. That bracket above of when you start getting from, team leader and, maybe manager above into like those bigger bracket roles, I don't think everyone can do those roles. I think there are skill sets that, can kill people very quickly if that's not your level. But I think that starting point is, as you say, the drive, the want to do it, the will to do it, and then somebody to support you.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got that, you can go and do it. But it's going to be hard, right? And I think, as I was saying back to, different generations, I think that, I never had a moment where it was hard and went, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. Whereas I see a lot of people have those hard moments and go, I'm not doing this anymore. See you later. And maybe there are easier ways to make money than, grafting through SARS and things of that nature. And, maybe it isn't the most rewarding all the time when you're in financial crime. But I think if you're doing it for the right reason and you've got the right support, I really do believe that you can get there. And like I say, I think hopefully the people who have gone through that with me would say the same, are in these positions now.
Comments on this.
Yeah.
He's lying.
No, but I think it's a really valuable thing. And I still love that, investment into younger people. I still love that opportunity that people get because I think, for me, I was given an opportunity.
Yes.
I remember the first person that hired me in fraud and I look back now and I go, why did she hire me?
What did she see
but,
me?
No, she did. And hopefully I repaid her. And maybe there were some days where she wanted to kill me and maybe there was others where it was fantastic. But if she hadn't given me that opportunity, I wouldn't be here I am.
But this is the frustrating thing, though. As people, hiring managers, the market, anyone, God, wants prepackaged people at the moment. They want, like if I'm hiring a EDD analyst and there's correspondent banking and payments, they must have correspondent banking and payments. There's no way they can have done any other thing. And I'm like, it is, if they've done something high risk like trade finance or they've done something else alongside it, I'm sure they can pick it up. But people just seem to think, and it's creating markets where no one's been trained.
Yeah.
And we're going to see a problem in 5. I'll see the problem in 5 years. I'll be the one with the problem.
Well, you create that pocket again, right? Of you end up pigeonholing people into a certain area because you're looking for those people, and if you can't find them, how do you get them? Well, you pay the people more who have already got that skill set.
But if you look at like crypto, do you remember 2020 when everyone was going bananas over crypto and people who were getting paid 65 were now getting paid 95 because there was such a demand for it? And I was like, you guys are nuts. Like if you can find someone who has an interest in crypto and they are working within like payments, fintech, anything that sits alongside it, give them 6 months and they will be up to date, up to speed, and you won't be paying them 95K. And of course, crypto went down and there was no need to have these specialists. And then they were stuck with people who overinflated their crypto knowledge. But because the person interviewing them didn't know that much, it was just a wild kind of roundabout thing.
There's plenty of booms like that, right? You look at so many different like pop-ups essentially within financial crime. And I think this is where you then realize like when a trend in the world happens, financial crime is there.
Oh,
and like how connected it all is to everything.
This is like so I'm so nerdy on it. It's socio-political, it's economics, it's political around like anytime Trump opens his mouth, there's something going on. Just this week, someone messaged me, he's talking again, can we get a sanctions specialist? Like, it's that quick. It is that like we need someone on the ground.
Yeah. But
it does go in peaks and troughs. Like, the Dear CEO letter a couple of years ago, everyone suddenly wanted assurance monitoring and testing, and they still do to a degree. So you went from, actually, how did you get the job at Tyne?
So I didn't know, you said at the start about this big role that everyone was hiring for. I had no idea about it.
Oh, it was the talk of the town.
No idea. I didn't know who Tide was, right? I had no clue. I got a call from my recruiter. I'd worked with her in the past. Not you.
So
look, she was great.
I know you're talking about.
Still speak to her now.
Shut up.
She said, very, very bluntly, right? I know you're not happy. There's an opportunity here. Would you be interested? And I was like, Yeah, I'm not happy. You know, I was sat in Milton Keynes. I was working, getting to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was finishing at 3 o'clock. You know, that was the banking life, right? You do your 8 hours and you leave. And I was fratting around trying to find different things. I didn't know where this program was going. I was looking at different opportunities in Santander, had, you know, conversations with multiple people. And if, very honestly, with my manager at the time, I said, I'm looking to get out, right? Like I need more, you know, I'm not being stretched. I'm not being pushed. And yeah, phone call to say, would you be interested in a company? Tide. No idea who they are. They're based in Clerkenwell. So very like close to the viaduct, an area that I know really well. Instead of turning left out the tube station, turn right. And I was like, yeah, why not? Let's have a chat. They said, can you come in tomorrow? You know, send your CV across. Because I didn't know at the time, right, that they were very late in the stage of recruitment. Like I think they were even at a point where they were going to offer to someone. So can you come in tomorrow? Yeah, okay. Get on the tube from Milton Keynes, went in, sat down with my boss now, Becky Marriott, who I think obviously a lot of you know, and at the time their product manager for ongoing monitoring, Sasha. Sat in a room, walked into this office, didn't know where I was, down this alleyway. Everyone sat on different tables, went into a reception area wearing a chinos and a shirt and couldn't look more out of place than anything in the world. And I thought I was dressed down, right? Like,
but what are you to wear? You know, you got to go higher than you go lower when you
yeah, it's like I had no jacket, I had no tie. I sat there with no tie on. I remember saying to my dad, like, I'm not going to wear a tie to this interview. He was like, what? You're not going to wear a tie? I was like,
the family.
No, like, I wear a shirt. I was like, and then I walked in, I was like, why am I wearing a shirt? I was like, should I go out quick, get changed? Get, like, everything was going through my head.
Yeah.
Sat down with Becky, sat down with Sasha, and kind of like the rest is history. It didn't even feel like an interview, right?
I bet it was so refreshing because I know both of them and they are just so pragmatic in the way that they approach FinCrime. It's about getting shit done.
Yeah.
I said a swear word, so we can bleep
You
that
bleep
out.
that. I remember her just saying to me, how would you build a financial crime team, essentially? Yeah. And I remember looking at it, the wall was a whiteboard. And I said, can I draw it? And she went, yeah, sure. And I love whiteboards. Anyone who's worked with me love whiteboards. It's like
You're
my
so fintech.
childish, crazy thing. I used to have a whiteboard in my bag that I drew on. Like, I used to do it in
Don't
one-to-ones.
admit these things out loud.
Geeky. I know, cut that bit out.
No, I'm going to make that a short.
Yeah, but so I was like, can I draw it? And she said, yeah, sure. And, 2.5 hours passed and it was like 6:30 and the receptionist knocked on the door and said, guys, you're the last here, we're going. And I thought it was half an hour. I drew through what a 3 lines of defense model would look like, what systems I would use, what tools I would import.
Had you thought about that ahead, or did it just kind of like...
No, like and I think this is like the style that Becky has really embedded in the 6 years that I've worked with her, is just like trust and it's yours. What do you want to do with it? And that was the first time I've probably kind of been let loose and said, what do you want to do with it? Probably for a good reason, right? You know, what would you do with it? And yeah, just sort of drew it out and thought this is what I would look at and this is what I would do. And as I say, it didn't even feel like an interview. It was just like a conversation of how do you build this and how do you fix the problem? Left, went home, got a call the next morning. We want to push you to the next stage. Can you come in this afternoon and meet Oliver, our CEO? Said, yeah, sure. Luckily my boss at the time was very accommodating, knew that I was interested. Drove down from Derby, thought I was going to miss the train. I remember the chaos.
What did you wear this time?
I wear a polo shirt this time, a little bit more casual. And then I walked in and Oliver's wearing a shirt. I was like, oh, I've got this totally wrong. And had, 20-minute conversation with Oliver about what the business looks like and where it's going to go and what we're going to do. And that was it. And I didn't really know where I stood. And then I got a call on Monday morning to say, we've spoken about salary. What is the figure that you have in mind? Can we get to that figure? And when can you start? And it was the biggest breath of fresh air in a recruitment process ever. I sent my CV on Wednesday. I had an offer on Monday and I'd already closed. Yep. 2 conversations. This is what I want. This is where I want to get to. This is my notice period. Phone call back. We can do this. This is where we can get to. Can you start then? Yes.
But I think that's a really good point. I cannot tell you how much the pace of recruitment affects whether someone's going to accept the offer. It is such a personal thing to people. If they've gone, like you said, gone into the office twice, you've taken time out of your day, and then people to drag their heels or give any show of reluctance later in the stages, it's rude at times.
Well, I went from the pain from leaving Amazon, right, of trailing through all of this, to then going to a company that wanted me. And I think that
it's
was
like dating though, right?
Maybe a complex in my own head of feeling wanted. And I remember ringing my best friend up and saying, they've offered me this. I'm going to go back to London. I've never heard of this company. I don't know what to do, but it's really exciting. And yeah, they all just went, yeah, go for it.
But also the caliber of people you met. Sometimes when you, I have candidates interviewing at a fintech or a startup or something, or someone they've not heard of. If they meet someone and they come across as not credible, that's done deal. But if you're meeting Becky, like if they're hiring someone like her, you're in safe hands. You're not going to somewhere that's Mickey Mouse compliance.
Yeah, but I know you say that, and your hindsight is a wonderful thing. It is true, but I had no idea, right? Like I wasn't in the network of what fintechs were. I wasn't in the network of speaking to different people. As you say, or as I said, I have had no idea that this was a big role. In my eyes, actually, from the banking world, I was like taking a massive risk here.
Oh, but isn't that? I mean, that's still the sentiment today when people move over. Like I am getting a lot of calls from the HSBCs and the Barclays and the Deutsche Banks, and they're all wanting to go into fintech because it's a little bit in vogue at the moment. Yeah. And I say to them, you need to think really carefully about this move. It's not just about getting it on your CV. It's not even a different kettle of fish. It's a different ocean. You are going into a different kind of way of working, and you need to be prepared for the pace and the change.
Yeah. But I remember I'd accepted the offer and I was like working through my notice period, and I was still like, should I, shouldn't I? I still had people at Santander saying, we can give you this role or that role. And I remember my dad just saying, like, just check, like, are they profitable? What's happening? What have they earned? Like you would think for a bank. I remember Googling and be like, they lost X amount last year. Where am I going? What am I doing? I've just got back into banking. Oh, I'm leaving. And then it was like, not that it was too late, but it was like, yeah, look, you're going. And yeah, it was a risk and it was a challenge, but it was the greatest thing that happened to me in my career.
A true career crossroads. Though.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was like, I cannot even explain how grateful I am for the journey that I've gone through at Tide. The trust that Oliver has placed in me as CEO, the trust that Becky has placed in me as CRO, the trust, just the business in general of where we've progressed to. And, even then I was still super young, right? I was the first sort of head of financial crime into that field, but everything grew below me. And that was what was just so amazing. There could have been a point where Tide went, it's getting big now, right? You don't have loads of experience. You've not done it before. Let's bring somebody in above you who can help you and manage you through that. And that to me, and maybe Becky and Oliver knew this more than I do, would have been the end of my career. Yeah. Because somebody coming in above me would have been just, it's over, right? Yeah. I'm not going to move until they move. There's nowhere for me to go. What happens? And, fortunately, it all grew below.
Did you ever have to articulate that to them?
No, never really. Look, strange to say, never had a conversation really about promotions, financials, what I want, what I'm on, a difficult conversation. I'm not happy. I like my package is wrong. Never. Now, do I think that if I'd gone out into the market and jumped around on other pieces, could have maybe got, 10, 15 grand more potentially. But do I think I would then be at a position where I am now as, an executive director, an MLRO, a career path to taking that over as the remainder of the sort of, Tide platform itself? Not a chance. Not a chance.
You know how I am all about transparency with money and packages and things. I'm not going to ask you tell us your salary, Matt. No, but you touched a little bit on it when you were talking about Amazon, about the weighting into shares and options with them and how that is a tie-in for them. When you joined Tide, did you discuss options, and was that part of your want to go there, or was it just something that wasn't really on your radar?
It was a nice added benefit. Yes. Like, I think, look, when I joined Tide, right, it was 30,000 members, I think 28,000 members. I was employee number 100 and something, there wasn't even a sniff or a vision that this was anything yet, and it wasn't, right? It was an idea, it was a structure, it was something that a vision, of Oliver's, of George's as the founder of where it wanted to get to, and it was how do we build that? So talking about stocks and shares was a bit irrelevant to me, and to be brutally honest, I was probably a bit burned from Amazon, because I left like 3 months before my stocks would have vested, and felt like, stocks. So I didn't look at that as a huge point. I think, and I didn't even know it, right? Like, I think coming from banking then into fintech, like understanding the funding cycles, Series A, Series B, Series C, I had no idea what that was.
No, well, actually explain it to people, because some people still don't know.
Well, it's all about the money that you raise to operate. So essentially you go through different rounds where you give off different percentages of the business to investors so that you can operate, because majority of these companies are loss leading, right? So they're building into a position where they can then be profitable, and they have the availability to potentially go public, and that's where everybody then makes all their money. Investors are looking for the next big thing, so they're splitting out their portfolios and investing into different fintechs or companies that could grow. They're taking certain percentages of that, and in each round you're looking at, well, how much money do I need for the next period to operate?
Yep.
And then you're looking at different investors who want to give you money for the capital, or capital for the investment into the company. And I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah. But it's also like, it's one of those things when you're interviewing and you're having these conversations. I get it all the time with candidates. They're too nervous to ask in the interview, can you explain that to me? I've not been familiar with it. You don't want to sound non-commercial. You don't want to sound naive. And so it's something that people don't ask in an interview to be explained. So it's nice to have somewhere that people can kind of listen to it.
Yeah, in the interview process, it was probably that quick. I didn't even know. It was like when the first few weeks that I was working there, and we were talking about different rounds and different funding that we'd gone through and what we'd got from the BCR grant and things of that nature. And it was just like, different world.
It is a different world. And it's a really nuanced thing. We've spoken about it before on the podcast. It's a nuanced thing about how you negotiate and how much weight you put onto that personally, because like you said with Amazon, it's nothing until it's something. Like I often get sometimes with their packages and they say, oh, we'll pay them below market rate, but we're going to give them all these shares. And I say to the candidate,
I wouldn't get lost in it, right?
No.
Like if you look at the statistics of how many companies actually IPO and you actually make any money out of it, it is so small. In our market, not to name names, but Monzo is a great example of where they were so close, right? With their expansion into the US and other bits and pieces, still not happened.
I mean, I saw
maybe it will, but
I saw on the
still
FT
not.
that they're eyeing it up, but who isn't always eyeing it up?
Yeah, look, you read the Financial Times and everybody's going to IPO, right? That's the news of it. Yeah, I think if anyone looked at it, everyone would be like, well, Tide's about to IPO. And, it's a long way.
Yeah.
Even at this stage, right, there's so much water that has to go under the bridge. There's so much that you have to get right. There's an element of luck that's involved in it, of course. It's the dream. It's what everybody keeps us going for. And, out of luck, not judgment, it would be great for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are still there, it would be great for them. But I don't think anyone outside of maybe the executives when they first joined, or people later on went, I'm joining because they're going to IPO and I'll make millions from the shares. And I think that's fintech in general. I think most people are joining for a different purpose, like to feel involved, to feel valued and to have some power of decisions and things, and to get paid for it.
Truthfully, when I'm hiring for particularly an early stage fintech or a startup or even a little bit more established and it's a senior position, if that senior person isn't asking me about options or shares, I'm not completely sure they understand what they're going into, because you want to be part of the build. You want to be invested literally into the business and have some idea of what you want to go into. The role when you went into Tide, I know it was head of financial crime. Was it quite operational at that point, or was it a second line role?
It was. There wasn't a line to even draw, right? So there was a KYC team, there was an ongoing monitoring team, there was, I think I had a team of 6, and I remember sitting down with, again, someone who I'm really good friends with still, the transaction monitoring analyst at the time, and saying, show me what you do. And he pulled up a spreadsheet and went, this is all the list of members. And each morning I just kind of pick one out and then I go through them and I look at them. And we've got a few dashboards that kick out some different rules on what people do. And we pull them from there, and we look and we read through them. And they were going through like literally every transaction, right? So it was like blanket, you couldn't miss a thing. Everything was going to be found. So there was no efficiencies in it. There was no risk-based approach. You had a KYC function that was a lot bigger. So they were obviously, really going through the profiles of what people were applying for and then looking at them. So it's like, where do we even start, sort of thing? And how do we get this into a position where it expands and it grows? And within the first 6 months, well, actually, before I'd even started, we'd hired 3 analysts in our office in Sofia. So we were then expanding it across different sites and jurisdictions. So, traveling again, when I was at Amazon, I traveled quite a bit across different European sites. Santander, I did nothing.
Do you enjoy it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's different now, right? Like back then I loved it. And I still love it now. Like I love going and seeing the team. I think Bulgaria is an amazing place. I think I say this to everybody, like I love Sofia. It's such a wonderful place. So very fortunate that we were in a good site. The food for number one, it's so cheap and cheerful. Like I'm from the Midlands, anything cheap is great. The alcohol is cheap and cheerful. Like their culture, I think, take away some of the really negative stereotypes. It's very welcoming. They of course have some underlying tones from history in the past and bad things that happen in the media that you see, and what country doesn't? But I think as a general, just very welcoming and just very warm. And there's so much you can do there, right? You can go skiing in Bansko, or you can go to Varna and go to the seaside, right? And it's such a variance. And yeah, the cost of it, as I remember the first time I went, and it was like 25p for a coffee.
What?
It's honestly, it's a bit more expensive now, but it was so cheap.
£5 for a coffee.
Yeah, you want a pint of local beer, €1. You know,
that sounds like a stag do dream.
Yeah, and the lev is like, so it's times up massively.
Yeah.
So you're going with 100 lev, and it's like £8, and you're like, wow, I've got loads of money. So yeah, I loved it, and you know, we started with 3 individuals in that office. 2 of them who still work for us, which
That's
is
awesome.
Crazy. One still in my team, one who's off on maternity leave at the moment. She's having a baby. And
how many people in the London office then for you at that
so
time?
in financial crime, I think there was 7.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so, I mean, it sounds so small, but you guys were also quite small at that point.
Tiny. Yeah. Like absolutely tiny. You know, we were probably a big team in comparison. You know, KYC was probably 20 odd members. You know, you're doing, I think we were doing like 1,500, 2,000 applications a month.
And who's your typical customer?
Tiny. So I think it's changed a lot. Back then was very much like, I have an idea. What's the first thing I need to do to set up a business? Open a bank account.
Right.
You know, like real SME and micro businesses.
Like plumbers and...
Yeah, small, really, really small. One-man bands and
really
things like
great
that.
recruiters.
Yeah, and really great recruiters. It was really small. I think now it has changed with the product. I think our product has obviously developed massively. You know, the availability now for multi-admin, multi-users. We have different products in lending, in acquiring, in, you know, savings. I think that makes it a much more rounded sort of business service platform, which is what Tide always wanted to be. Do
you think customers are reticent to use you because you're not as regulated as a bank?
No, I don't think they have a clue, if I'm brutally honest. And I think, yeah, maybe criminals look at that and go, okay, you're potentially not regulated, so your controls are going to be different. But I think for the people that want to use the product, I think they just look at like, what's the best? I
mean, the multi-access thing is phenomenal. That's game-changing, right? Yeah. Like, especially for small businesses, when you think about if it is just one great recruiter with a great idea.
And a great business partner.
Great named Ian Christie.
You didn't pay me to say that.
We don't want to do the banking and account stuff. So we'll often, you will find a freelancer that does it outsourced for us or something like that, right? So that is actually really useful.
Yeah, and we've expanded loads. Like, I think one thing I'm really proud to say of like, and it's sometimes hard to ever write it all down or say what you've been involved in, is the multiple different products. Yeah. And I think that was another wing that, you know, in a large corporate bank or a high street bank, you're going to do one product and that's your specialism, right? Like, you know, whereas over the years I've done acquiring, I've done, investments and savings, things of that nature. We've done multi-user, we've done expansion into different countries. Like usually it's all just one of those things. And I think that's what was so exciting. Like everything changes and there's more on the horizon, right? Like we're not stopping, you know, with different things like payroll and expenses and all those bits and pieces. Like it never stops. Yeah, but that's what Tide always wanted to be, right? You know, and it still rings true, I think. And Oliver's vision, and I'm sure everyone else's vision, was that we're a business banking platform, right? We're not a bank. We're not somewhere that you just go for your BCA. We can provide all those services for you, and we'll do it better than everybody else. And maybe the do it better bit is not always there, but we get there. And I think that's the key.
You are doing something better, which I'll give you guys tip your hat to. We recruited a role for you last year, and it was the first time that I had really seen fraud and transaction monitoring slammed together. You guys have the same, well, not slammed together, but they're together under the one leader. Yeah. They're so often cousins. And when you think about it, it boggles that they're not always together, because they must inform each other all throughout the journey of the customer. And they so often are separate. Even in your competitors, they're separate. So were you part of that drive to push them together, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, I think that was the vision of the 3 lines of defense model that me and Becky had. You know, one thing that Becky pushed me very hard on was letting go of the operational areas. You know, operations through and through was like my bread and butter. It's what I'm very good at. Yeah, you know, look, it's a painful space, right? It's a very thankless task being in operations sometimes, especially in ongoing monitoring and KYC. But it was an area that was just well known to me, and maybe from Amazon, right? Because it was very operational. It was what I knew most, and I was good at that. You know, managing big teams, getting things done, meeting targets. You know,
but you have to be a bit KPI heavy. You have to you need to be quite analytical. It's actually before we go on to that, it's an interesting trend that I'm seeing. The fintech heads of compliance and heads of financial crime usually come from first line.
Yeah.
And it's because it's the biggest pain point for them. And they're, sorry to say, banking guys, a little bit stronger because they catch the problems before they come through. If you've look at MLROs from some of the mid-sized and larger banks, they've never, ever, ever touched first line.
No.
And so they're layering policies and procedures and expectations on the first line that just aren't pragmatic. So I can understand why you kind of wanted to stay there.
It's about knowing how to fix it, right?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, even in a second line role, you know, your job and you are based on have you fixed it. And it's now not have you fixed it individually, it's have you fixed it as a business. And yes, you're driving something in a different manner and maybe people are doing different points. But, you know, if you're an MLRO or you're a director of financial crime and, you know, you go to the board at the end of the year and you say, well, we've still got this problem, we haven't changed it. Your audit comes out and picks it up. Like, you're the accountable party for it, right? So whether it's you that goes and does it or whether it's somebody else that you motivate to do it or manage to do it, the output and the goal is still the same. You've got to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I really struggled and Becky really dragged me away, is that I was very good at just doing it, like being the person who does it. You know, nobody else wants to do it. It's going to take too long. Don't manage somebody to do it. Don't oversight, just do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where second line and moving from, you know, first line world and letting go of the first line world into a second line world is very different, very challenging. You know, you have to have really good stakeholder relationships. And I think being in the first line or understanding the first line helps with that, because you know their pain. Well,
but it is a different perspective. I've often heard it described as first line is reactive and you're proactive in the second line. So not waiting for the problems to come to you necessarily in the second line.
Did someone in second line tell you they were proactive?
Obviously. It was Matt when you joined.
I think both. Look, you know, you plan to always be proactive, and I think there is probably more time in second line to be proactive. But I still think you're very reactive, right? Like, you know, something changes in the market, something happens, something is escalated. Yeah, I think all of financial crime is still in this state very reactive. I do think, you know, the fire is much warmer when you're in first line because you're closer to the problem potentially, and you know, from second line, I think this is why. Sometimes there's a big split between first and second line, because people in first line will look at it and go, we just sat in your ivory tower telling us what to do.
But of course it feels like that, especially if the person telling them what is to be done has never done a KYC file in their bloody life. Like, of course you'd be going, F you. I won't swear this time. F you.
Look, I would. And I think that's why it's nice to know how it feels. And, you know, sometimes you write a message out with like, grrr, and then you go, actually, I know how much pain you're in. Don't worry.
Do you know, it's the most common question I get asked, apart from, Jess, why are you so cool? Is
you can edit that one out.
No, don't edit it out. Is how to move from first line to second line. Because if I, truth be told, and I'm recruiting for you a second line role, which you're going to give to me hopefully real soon to recruit, and I sent you first line CVs, you would say, where's the second line experience? And I know we talked about it earlier, if the can do has done. I find, and my advice to people is try and do it internally.
Yeah.
What do you look for in a person that you would be moving from second line to first line?
You're less of a gamble when somebody knows you, right? So if you think, okay, well, I've got X amount of months that I've worked with somebody, I need to know them, versus an hour in an interview to get to know them, and you've got to take a risk on somebody, who are you going to pick? And totally. In recruitment, in any piece where you're taking somebody from first line to second line for the first time, there's an element of a risk, right? And, you know, maybe that person is so wonderful that it's worth the risk, but 9 times out of 10, I think the internal person is going to probably win.
It's great optically, though. Like, if people see you promoting internally, everyone sees that there's a future in the company and there's places to go.
And for those people who have worked hard for you, right?
Totally.
Like, who have done the hard miles and deserve the progress. And it's very demotivating. As I said, like, you know, if somebody would have been brought in above me, I would say it's over, right? Like, I've done all of this pain, I've done it all. You just brought somebody in from outside.
Yeah.
So I think that is a big factor. I think when you look at it, there's similar skills, but they're used in a very different way. Communication, you know, your communication of stakeholder management is so key in second line. You know, understanding, as I say, what people are going through and how to motivate them to get it done. I think that is really, really key.
If someone was in your first line now, and they wanted to, in a year's time, get to second line, what would you say they need to do for the next year?
Truly understand financial crime. So get a deep understanding of one of the areas. So whether that be sanctions, money laundering, fraud, ABC, I think go and specialize your learning in a single field. You know, don't try and be the jack of all trades. You know, give yourself a niche and go and really understand it. I think, working cases and going through them, I think there's a difference between like truly understanding then the regulations, how it's going to happen and how you look at that. I think that is massive. I would say work on your communication styles, not style. So as I said about being able to give people feedback in a different way, motivate people in a different way and understand it. Be more data driven. It is a massive one. So really get to understand how MI works, how you use MI, what it shows you and things of that nature. And I think then probably the final one, which is maybe a strange one to say because it's probably a weakness of mine, is your writing skills and literate skills of being able to articulate something into a report.
And why is that a weakness of yours?
Because I'm dyslexic.
Oh, right.
So
that
people probably see it all the time, right?
Yeah.
With my emails of different things or messages.
Yeah.
In my head, it says it perfectly, but in reports and others, it doesn't. And that is a challenge, right? When you're writing to board members or you're writing to executive committees or you're writing to the regulator, the first thing that people will judge you on is your articulation of what you said.
Absolutely. And it's a skill set that is a learned skill set. Like I always say to candidates, there's a difference between a talent and a skill. And most of FinCrime is a skill. You need to work on it. There's very few parts of FinCrime that's a talent. So if you want to do something, you need to learn it. You can't just expect to be noticed for your natural ability in sanctions.
No,
it's
not at all. And, this is where probably for me it has been a challenge in my career is the academic side. Look, I don't like academics and learning, right? I wasn't great at school. I didn't enjoy university. The learning side of it is not what I'm good at. So then when somebody says, as a voluntary, go and do an ICA diploma or a certificate or go and do an ACAMS course or whatever it is, my skin crawls, right? I'm like, oh, no, I've got to spend my own time working on it. I've got to read all these things. But they are the foundations that set you up to go and then put it into practice.
Do you think the university degree is dead?
No, not at all. I think it teaches you some really valuable lessons in life and working. And I think that is one thing that now, moving away from office culture, we're losing.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Because you're talking about the apprenticeship scheme when you're getting them from 16 and you're teaching them what working life is. I still remember distinctly my first job out of uni having to use Outlook and being like, what is this? Like, you don't use those things at university.
Yeah.
And if you're not alongside someone who's teaching you the etiquette of working in an office, like if you're fully remote, it can be incredibly challenging to kind of understand what's expected of you in a nuanced way. It's not explicitly said quite often. It was funny when I first started my recruitment career here. I didn't know your university names, truthfully. I knew Cambridge and Oxford and I didn't really care about them. And so
I didn't go to either of those.
But you know how everyone was so fixated on those when I first arrived over here in 2013 or whatever.
UCL.
Yeah. What are they called? The Red Brick or something? Or Oxbridge.
Yeah, Oxbridge.
Yeah. Anyway, so I would be submitting candidates, not looking at their CVs, and they'd be getting interviews. And my colleagues would be like, how did you get them an interview? They didn't go to Warwick or they didn't go to... And I was like, I didn't look. And I think we have prejudices ourselves around what people expect and what is good. Have you hired someone or done any of the courses yourself that you would really recommend?
I think as a foundation now, it's expected that you have an ICA or an ACAMS. And I think if you're going to go into second line, you have to have one or both of those and to understand them and put them into practice. And I do think that is like a leveling up bar of just the standard of candidate that people want to see. It's like a willingness to learn.
I was about to say, it more than anything, it's a stamp on self-education. Yeah.
Do I think that you learn loads of them? I think it depends where you are in your career. I think I probably did them at a point in Tide where I'd kind of experienced all of these things that I was seeing. Whereas if I'd done them on the apprenticeship program, like, a lot of people were doing, because I did my ICA at the same time that the apprenticeship scheme was doing it. Santander allowed me to do the ICA in conjunction with them. I hadn't done any qualification. So, you've got people who come out of school and doing the same qualification as them. So I looked at it and probably, at the wrong time in my career, had already seen and done a lot of those things, maybe made it easier, right, for me to go through it. But I do think they really help you with regulations. Yeah. And I think that combination between like regulatory compliance and financial crime is really important. And, the SMF 16 and the SMF 17, how closely they're intertwined, but actually how differently they are. Yeah. You see a lot of the times now that people are sort of in this SMF 16 and 17. I'm actually a really big advocate of splitting them. Like people working very closely with people. And unfortunately, I work very closely with our head of compliance. And
I think you just said unfortunately.
No, very, very fortunately. Don't let them edit that one, Conrad. Definitely, fortunately. But it's again such a different skill set. That communication is personified further when you're communicating with a regulator. I remember the first few times that we went through responses to working groups or things of that nature with the FCA and just been like, my communication style is so wrong here.
Really?
Like I'm so far away from where I need to be.
In terms of, and what was the adjustment?
I think with the regulator, it's a little bit more yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir.
Right.
And I think it's taking your ego out of it and just you're really understanding that it's not about you and what you think is right and what they're asking or whether you disagree with it. It's, they set the rules and that's the reason for it. And if they ask that question, you answer that question. Not that question doesn't make sense. I don't want to do it. I was probably quite rebellious and still am to a certain degree of, if it doesn't make sense, I won't do it. Or if I don't like it, I won't do it. And that maybe early in my career ruffled a lot of feathers. But with the regulator and what you're working with them, it is your responsibility to respond as per the principles that they set of what they ask for. And I think that for me was real, not a breath of fresh air because it was quite a challenge, but just looking at again how you tailor that communication style. Yeah. And, I was very, very fortunate that, the people that I work with, Conrad and Becky, have great experience of doing that and were able to learn from, what I would see as industry experts, which has really helped me now to be comfortable in those conversations and comfortable sending an email and, supporting others with doing that. I think it's really important. And, when I see people who come into these roles, companies need an MLRO, so we'll hire somebody junior. I'm like, when you get a request, what do you send?
Don't even get me started. I think I've spent every podcast talking about stop going into MLRO roles too young because it just ruins your career. If I see a CV and they've been a KYC analyst and then they've gone into a head of compliance MLRO, I'm like, oh dear.
It's bad on the companies though, right? Like,
it just tells you so much about the culture.
Yeah, I think it really does. We just need to fill this position. We just need to give them a name. But when those questions get asked, like I couldn't look back and think now how I would answer those things without the support that I had.
ChatGPT seems to be helping a lot of people, to be honest.
Maybe.
But going back to the mixing of the SMS 16, 17, it became in vogue 2023 again. Everyone was trying to combine the roles, but they're separate skill sets. To the fact that I barely know any heads of compliance because I know all of FinCrime. The thing that really confuses me, befuddles me, perplexes me is why the MLRO typically reports into the head of compliance, because for me, it's a riskier part of the business is financial crime. And I'm not saying it should be switched. I'm saying they should be pairs. And I also both think that they should be on Exco. And it's typically the head of compliance that goes into Exco. Do you have any thoughts on that about why that's kind of shaped like that?
So we don't do it like that,
no, I know,
which is great.
Yeah.
Win for Tide. And I can see why, right? Because that's the person that ultimately works with the regulator. And I can see that they're the people who are answering the questions to the people who matter the most. Why would you not have that person as a sounding board and the sort of most executive sign off? Like, I think that makes sense. But the input of what goes into there versus who's pressing send is what the difference is.
Yeah.
When we get requests through or whatever it may be, or reg reporting at the end of year or things like that, it's all financial crime data.
Yeah.
Like if you ask a regulatory risk team to go and pull it all out and find all the teams and get you all the information, they don't, right? Like they vet the data, they read through it, they challenge you and ask the questions. That's the point of a lines of defense model, which is great. But they're not gathering it or looking at it. So, do they really understand it or need to understand it? I think to a certain degree, yes, but not as experts, right? No. So yeah, I can understand why it sometimes can be a little bit the wrong way around. And I can see why people combine them, right? The cost of it at that level, the cost of compliance, I think companies speak about it a lot, salaries as a basic. We've spoken about salaries, but in the higher level of where you get to financial crimes, salaries are very lucrative. Well, they cost a lot.
They are. They're really high paying salaries. Like even at the startups, I have, you think about them, they're starting a business, they're yet to onboard customers, yet to do anything. And they're paying at minimum 120K in a base salary, which is probably more than the founders are paying themselves at that point just to get through the licensing. Plus they're paying some consultancy to help them through. I understand it's very cost prohibitive, but it's worse if you get it wrong.
But it's interesting though, isn't it? Like, what would you do, right? Like everybody wants an established and good individual who's done it before. Now, those people are in wonderful roles in wonderful companies. So what entices you to go to another company and start again?
Wow.
Stocks and shares and a salary, right? But, if you've got family to provide for and others, there's only a certain level of where you're going to drop to for a salary. And then there's only a certain level of candidate you can get as that organization. So I think it's very hard, you know, of what you want your phasing to be. And, you know, maybe I'm an example of, you know, where Tide got very lucky of what they hired at that cost at that time. You know, obviously they had Becky as well, which is sort of a real benefit for them. But they invested a lot in that space. You know.
Totally. But it's paid off for them. And going back to the point about combining fraud and TM, it's an effective way of doing it, an efficient way of doing it. And it's a cost saving because you can lean into all the tech that has been put into that function, and you don't need to have two separate tech or product teams. You don't, you know, it's a really keen way of doing it. I was interested in your really funny job title now.
The mixture of all 4 of them or 5 of them.
So if you were, I asked Pesh this, who was on the last podcast, can you describe your job, not to a layman, not to someone at a barbecue, someone who knows what fincrime and compliance is, but can you succinctly tell people what you do?
So I think probably what's important for my role is that there is 2 different roles into it. So, I'm the Director of Financial Crime and Deputy MRO for Tide. So Tide as a holdings company and as a platform. And then we have different subsidiaries that we've acquired and obviously integrated into the Tide network. So, Funding Options, I'm Executive Director of Funding Options. They're a credit brokerage service.
I was about to say, can you explain?
Yeah, so they do credit brokerage. Their license is in credit brokerage. It's not in bank accounts. It's very different. And we chose as part of our expansion, say we as if I was heavily involved in the decision at Tide, that from like a lending side, instead of being involved in, direct lending, to do indirect lending, and to do that through a brokerage service and a company that we acquired through Funding Options. But there is a degree of risk that obviously is combined into that, and they have a license. So they have to have the same SMF 16 and 17 roles, and that has to then stem through the core of the company, which is owned by Tide Holdings and Tide Platform. So I then hold the MLRO title for Funding Options. Because I hold the MLRO title, I need to have a certain level of seniority to make decisions. So that's why I sit as an executive director, attend the risk committees, the board committees, and perform the financial crime risk element to that. But my core role is very much still at Tide. So from a Funding Options perspective, we outsource a lot of those controls to Tide as an organization, and those teams work across that as a vertical of lending being a product. So my role is still very much focused on Tide's expansion. So globally, I look after financial crime risk for the business. So sit within our second line of defense, reporting into Becky Marriott, who's our CRO, and have then a very close connection to the executive suite through those platforms. So responsible for financial crime risk at the risk committees and all of things of that nature, approval for expansions of new products, of new jurisdictions, and then heavily involved in how we work through setting up, the functions from an operational perspective as we go into different areas.
And I'm curious because all throughout your sort of career, including this one, it seems like you're very strategic, you're very people focused. You have always had that kind of commercial growth mindset to you. Is that something that you've always worked on, or has that kind of just been how you are?
So I've always liked business. Even before when I was at university, I had my own businesses and have done things separately. I like to see success and I like to be involved in that. And I think, Tide gave me an opportunity to do that in probably much safer space, somebody else's business, but making decisions with those and working through it. I've also always understood that, the success of the business is critical to the success of my career, right? If the business grows, then my position will grow. And, very fortunately, as I said, Tide rewarded me as we expanded as a business and as my role grew. So I was very much, on both sides of thinking that, yes, this is financial crime and compliance and keeping things safe, but yes, we've got a business that we need to operate and it needs to be successful. So I think I always, just grew up with an understanding of the business side and then just transition that into how you balance it with risk and how you put that together. But
you are, I know you made fun of me for saying this a little bit, but you're like the new wave of MLRO and head of financial crime, where you very much are involved in strategy and business decisions and you understand the commercials. It's no longer that you are a back office, not you, but heads of financial crime can no longer just be a back office function where you just chat about regulations and can you make onboard this client, yes or no. It's kind of driving product, it's driving new avenues, global expansion. Has there been, this is my curiosity more than anything, has there been any books or any TED Talks, anything that's really impacted you in that journey?
Not really books because I don't read. No, it sounds really bad. Right? I really don't read books. No, again, not loads, right? I read, I think, is it Think Like a Spy not long ago.
Think Like a Spy.
Yeah, that was quite an interesting one.
Did you have a mentor?
I have some books in my bag, actually. I can't remember all the titles.
Are you lugging them around for credibility?
So I always carry them of different ones of what I should read. Should we get my books out and see what I've got?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
This is like now a sale for everybody.
What's it? What's the bookshop? Waterstones. Welcome to Waterstones Reviews.
This is going to be terrible. Oh, so this is a book that I read loads, which is terrible. Doesn't really relate to financial crime. So I have, very exciting me, microphone. Oh,
so we're probably going to cut him sliding back into his chair because I think that's really...
So the first book that I have, which I read a lot, which is a gift, is The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Only men read this.
This is a really interesting book. Waging war.
What is
variation
it? Is it actually
in tactics.
About war?
It's about strategy.
Okay, do you know what? No,
and
stop.
Things of that nature.
I have this joke that anytime a man hits 30, he watches Nazi movies and read war books. I don't know what it is all about you guys.
So this was a gift from one of my closest friends to when I left Tide.
Does it apply to why is it so impactful?
I think it really works with understanding how to act in a boardroom and a senior committee and how to get what you want or what you need. I think that is one thing that I do appreciate. And I think a lot of the time I went through a lot of situations where I would come out of a meeting and I would read that book on the tube home and I would go, that makes sense now. Should have done that. We'll do that next time.
And for people not looking at it on video, it's a very thin, digestible book and it's got a very cool picture on the front.
Yeah. So again, for me, really short, dead easy to read. No, a few complex words.
And it's almost like bullet pointed.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So you can really just find a point in it. I really like that book.
Oh, and a cute little message inside. I love when people write on the front of books.
It was a gift, yeah. The other one that I have is the miniature copy of Power by Robert Greene. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. So again, this is one that I think really relates to in a board experience or in a senior committee experience for the first time, where you can tie things in, which helps you just understand a little bit more again of how people think or different thinking processes.
Do you know, it's actually a really good point. It's not often talked about, the shift in gear and the way of thinking when you become senior. You can't just continue to manage or be the person you were when you were a middle manager. It's a complete shift. And if you think that's just going to come naturally as a talent, you're going to do yourself a disservice. So it's important that I'd say to people, treat it a little bit like a university project, like you're upskilling yourself now.
Yeah. So like the first page of Open, which I think is so relevant, it says, win through your actions, never through argument. It says, any momentary triumph you think you have gained through argument is really just a phallic victory.
Oh, I started reading that negotiation book that everyone's reading at the moment. It's something similar to that, about the FBI's tactics and stuff.
I think it's really interesting. I think this really helps you just understand through your career, right? So do not build a fortress to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous.
But in terms of your management style, that sounds like it comes through, right? Like making sure that you're available and listening and outcome focused rather than argument focused.
Yeah, like make your accomplishments seem effortless. I think it's really nice to reflect sometimes and just read through that and see how it fits.
And it's pretty as well, right?
Yeah, again, dead easy.
I'll hold it.
Dead easy. 30 years on from first code. Not gonna lie, I've never read this book. Somebody must have recommended it to me, and so I don't know what this one is, but I've carried it around probably for about 5 years.
One day you'll read it.
When I come to podcasts and things, it's
you show it off and say, really know.
So I've never read that book, but that's an interesting book. Oh, I have a really, so this was again a gift. So this is Clara's Genius Plan. And this is actually written by somebody's mother who works in my team now.
Oh.
So I remember her posting about it. So it's written by Jill Belchetz, who's Ruth Belchetz's mother. And it's to help a lady who is homeless. So it's like a little kid's story that talks about, be kind, essentially, and be nice to people and how you can help others. And I remember, I think all of the profits go to charity, and I remember her posting it and me buying it and thinking, I can read this to kids in our family and things of that nature.
What an incredible woman really to do something like that.
So again, another signed book at the start.
You are gathering them. You're going to have one of those libraries that people pay for.
And then The Prince by Machiavelli was the last one that I have. So I think that one goes through itself.
Yeah.
So a bit of a variety, but I think, the first two were probably more valuable in my career than anything.
But so the reason I ask that is everyone kind of thinks that, I used to think where back early in my career when I was talking to MLROs and heads of financial crime and CEOs, it's just like the right kind of personality can do it. Or, they've always had that kind of gravitas about them. But as I've gotten to realize that people are people and they're developing, and I think it's because I've been doing financial crime for recruitment for so long and I've grown up with the market, I see people that were just not strong senior people and suddenly are in these incredible roles. And I always wondered, is it a conscious effort? What do you do? So it's nice to see that. I mean, you carry them around. I don't know if you read them.
You want to feel how heavy that backpack is. Honestly, I can leave them here now. It's done. Brought them all the way from Derby. No. Look, I'm not even going to sit here and say that I read all the time or things like that. I really don't. That is not my character. I learn through experience and I learn through doing and I like doing things. So I'm a much more tactile and physical person than an academic person. And I think that's stood me in really good stead in fintech world where, as we've said many times, you are judged by doing. But there are things, I think reflection, as I said with a number of those, like reflecting on situations and understanding, why it didn't work or how it could get better. Or even if it did work, could you change that in the future and things of that nature. And I've been through, a lot of experiences probably where people had an expectation that I've done this before and you know what I'm doing. And I haven't got a clue.
I reckon if I was a young baby Jess and I was trying to get a meeting with you, I would be pooping my pants. Because I would think you've got this big scary job title and you're a big scary person and you're not scary, I don't think. And it's interesting that you still work on yourself and you're still developing it. Now, I have got a question from Pesh, the previous guest, and you're going to get to ask a question for the next person.
Depends how nice this question is now for the next guest. This could be a pass it on and double it.
No, so her question to you is, if you could wave a magic wand, which financial crime regulation would you want to be rid of?
Oh, like the first one that jumps to mind instantly is mandatory reimbursement. But I think now that we're going through it, I'm more inclined to say that there is a big benefit to it. And I think the big benefit to it is probably on the not working mat side of like seeing the harm firsthand to people of what fraud can do and how...
Wait, sorry, just because there may not be people that understand that. What's mandatory reimbursement?
The Payment Services Regulator implemented in October last year, October the 7th, that APP fraud claims will now be mandatory reimbursed by the financial institute. So if you are victim to an APP fraud scam, the bank that you have your account with and where your money then went to will split the loss 50-50 and you as a consumer will lose no money.
Yep.
So from a consumer perspective, it's obviously fantastic, right? And the purpose of it was to try and combat fraud and to reduce fraud within the sphere. Now, I think anyone who works in the network when it first came out or was first released thought it's never going to happen. Then when it got closer to happening, thought, this is going to be a disaster when it happened. And, ultimately, I think Tide as well, we were really championing for changes to happen before it came in. I don't think we're ever championing to say that there shouldn't be a regulation, but for it to have been thought through in more detail of the different loopholes and nuances that could have occurred. And I think at the time there was, a lot of angst and a lot of, apprehension about what this would do and what it would look like and would it have a benefit or not? Would it make it better or worse and things of that nature? So it's probably a bit of a cop-out to say that would be the one that I would change because, as I say, I've seen firsthand with friends and people who've been a victim of fraud and how just catastrophic it is for their lives. Imagine sitting in a position where your bank account is empty and you need to go to the shop and buy something. You've got not a penny.
But yeah. I think I heard a conversation about it, though, around, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, not that I believe in this, but if people are becoming lazy and they're not being as aware of fraud because the risk isn't on them.
So I think that could happen, right? But in my two experiences of people who have been victim of fraud, they are both professionals who've worked in risk.
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to go into any details of what happened or where it was, but they are both people that you would look at and go, how could you be a victim of fraud?
Oh, but they're so clever now. And, with the resurgence of AI and things, like when you think about the voice changing technology that people have, like it used to be the racism, prejudice, whatever, if you got caught something with a foreign accent, you would hang up on them because you thought it was fraud. But they're so much more sophisticated now. They can make it sound like your next door neighbor or your sister or whoever you want it to sound like.
I think, though, if you look at frauds and anyone who works in it, I agree that it can be much more sophisticated. The simplest ones still work best because they prey on the grounds of values of humans. So fear being an instant one, fear for somebody else, or fear for something that is yours, or something of that nature. You know, you take the basic investment scam. And from a financial crime perspective, anyone in the field will go, how do people still fall victim to somebody saying, I'm from your bank, your money's not safe, you need to move it somewhere else? And the reason for it is because people go into a panic in an instant moment of something that I need and is so important to me is not safe.
But also imagine if you're halfway through cooking dinner, you've got a screaming kid and they're calling, oh my God, just get it sorted.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, it's
people aren't paying attention always in the way that you think you would in that moment.
Your livelihood is not safe. It's a fear factor, and everybody processes fear very differently, right? You know, it's very easy to look out from from outside in and say, well, you should have stopped, thought about it for a minute and won it. You know, if you're in a panic, you just, this person is, you know, you're with you, they're an ally, they're supposed to be helping you, they're telling you the things that you want to hear, and you're going, save my money, please. And that's why it's such like, I think it's so heartbreaking when you see some of these stories. And I think it's very hard when you're on the side of it from a financial crime perspective of sometimes, you know, trying to prove that, you know, we shouldn't be reimbursing or things of that nature, because, you know, there is a person who's been affected by that.
Their life has been hurt and
destroyed.
Yeah,
you know, if you think, you know, you're 35, 40 years old, you've saved, you know, £2,500 a month, £5,000 a month for 10 years, and you've got you know, 100 grand, which takes a long time to save when you've got tax and everything to pay for. Somebody takes that off you in a minute. You lost 10 years of your working life.
Absolutely terrifying. They move pretty quick though. We actually just got a wonderful new hire at FincSelect called Chanel, and she's our candidate experience manager. Day one, she got an email from Ian Christie, who's my business partner, guys, asking her to click this link and make a payment. Day one. Oh, obviously wasn't him. It was just a bogus email address that looked very similar to his. And I can also imagine in a business sense how it's very easy to just click.
So criminals prey on the things that people want. Yeah. So everybody wants faster payments. Nobody wants to wait. Everyone wants things instantly. So criminals play on that, right? Like, it's Newton's second law. Every opposite reaction has an equal opposite reaction. Yeah. You know, there is a great to it and there is a bad to it. And you're balancing that out in the middle is very hard. You know, fortunately for us as professionals, there is an industry that will always be here. You know, certainly to a certain degree that it needs support to grow and to do that. So, yeah, I think that's probably not the right one. It's the first one that came to my mind, but it wouldn't be that one.
I know I warned you that we're going to have the Think 5, so I'm going to hit you with them. Are you ready?
Yeah, I don't remember them at all. So.
Oh, they're really groundbreaking questions, honestly. Like, it would be like on 60 Minutes at some point. First question is, what's the best job you've ever had?
This one.
What, this podcast?
No, so Tide, and then probably before that was when I worked in my local golf shop. It was amazing. Like,
that is so rogue. I did not expect you to say that.
No, it was like unbelievable. Just look, I was 17, 18 years old, living the dream, right, working in a golf shop, having fun. Like, I have memories of a lifetime from where we laughed ourselves to the floor with things that we'd done and jokes. They're memories, right? You know, they were great. I think, working at Tide is obviously amazing, and I love it more than anything, but you don't really get to share all of those experiences, maybe with the people that you're working with, but what I do now is much more sensitive, right? Yeah. Whereas, you know, when you did those jobs back in the day, like even McDonald's, like when I worked there, that was amazing. Like being part of a production team, being really busy, people probably laugh at it, but yeah, my guilty pleasure is still a McDonald's. So it was amazing.
Yuck, man. I don't eat McDonald's.
Health is wealth.
Health is wealth. Okay, let's ask you a more serious question. What's the best FinCrime tech you've used?
SciFast is really good. It's maybe not tech.
Yeah.
But I think, so we use a lot of different SciFast tools. I think for the...
SciFast is?
So that they're a non-for-profit organisation that work to combat fraud, I think. Maybe we'll have to Google it, but I'm pretty sure it is. I don't know, but I really like SciFast. We've used it a lot. We still use a lot of their areas. There are other tools that we're really experimenting with now. So Risk 247 is another one that we're really looking into that really benefits us from your company's house information. We probably haven't got the most out of it just yet, but we're working on that and looking at it. But SciFast, just as a basic tool of understanding more about people before they join you is really valuable. Our target market, as I said earlier, is like, man in a van, I've got an idea, I want to start a business. So when you ask for proof of business, most people don't even have a business. Yes. But they feel that the process is, well, I need to open an account so I can start a business. And then it's like, well, where does your risk appetite sit of what you can do? Well, if you know that that person who says that they want to start a business has committed fraud on another platform somewhere else, you're probably a little bit more, concerned and probably want to ask a little bit more about what they're doing, or maybe restrict that behavior before it starts. So I think they do a great job of tackling a problem that a lot of other companies have tried to do, which is pull people's data together and use it. Yeah, I think everybody talks about how we should share data, how we should be more collaborative, but nobody wants to stick their hand up and actually say, well, I'll own the data and the decision. And I think SciFast do a really good job of that. So I really like the partnership that we have with them at Tide. We work very closely with them. We build new products with them. We implement new products. So it may not be tech, but I think just that as a tool is really valuable.
I mean, the company's house thing is funny. You see like Ray Blake's posts all the time on LinkedIn, and some house in Morden has got 45 companies in it.
Yeah, and you think like, how do people miss it? But it is so hard when there is so much, right?
Of course, yeah.
And that really cuts through a lot of it. So that's probably a more up and coming one that I think a lot of people are using.
Okay, I've got it. You can take this question how you want, but it's deeper. What keeps you up at night?
Painting the kitchen.
Oh
no, I think from a FincRime perspective, this is actually one that I thought about because I was trying not to be cliche, but there's not that much that keeps me up at night from a working perspective. And I think that's really important. As I said, there is always going to be a fire that burns. And when you wake up tomorrow, it will still be on fire, and you'll put it out and there'll be another fire. So if you stress about it and can't sleep, then, your performance and focus on it is only going to deteriorate. So I think I do a very good job of kind of switching off and, going and enjoying life and sort of separating it out. Maybe Becky won't say that when I message her at 5 a.m, but that's me being awake normally. Yeah. So, from a FinCrime side, there's probably not loads that keeps me awake at night. I think there has been phases. So you spoke about BBLS earlier and the COVID loans. That was something that kept me up awake at night for, probably, 2-3 months. And maybe then after, when they were doing the review and the audits of it, maybe another 2-3 months. I think PSR and the implementation of all of that, of what was needed, was again probably something that kept me awake at night. Sanctions now with all the changes, it's probably like
there's times when it needs to happen, right? Yeah.
Like, how quickly can you react to it? Okay, well, can that wait until tomorrow? No, it can't. Well, I'm staying awake all night.
But going back to skill sets as a senior person, it is so important you train your brain to compartmentalize, because you're senior, it's all big problems at some point, and if you can't step away and step back from the problem, you'll never solve it, right?
Yeah. The thing that's in front of you is always the biggest problem. And then, you go, it can't ever get worse. And then you look back and go,
and then it does.
Well, that was easy. Let's do it again. And how are we here where we are? I would say maybe turning it on its head a little bit. It's valuable as a financial crime professional to be able to sleep at night and not take everything to heart, right? I think as someone who's a senior person in risk, and if you're an MLRO and you're the accountable individual, responsible individual, it could be quite a heavy weight, right? Don't let it sort of deter from what the good things that you are.
Yeah, agree. Okay, can I ask you a question that means nothing to no one but me, because I'm trying to psychoanalyze all the heads of financial crime? Where in your sibling order do you come in? How many siblings do you have?
I am top, and I have one.
Oh, you made me say I'm top.
Yeah, oldest.
I'm the big dog.
Oldest and one. Leading the way.
Leading the way. Ugh, I bet your siblings hate that.
We do such different things. Yeah. So, as I said, my mother was in banking, and I went into banking, and my dad had his own business and different things, and then works as a director in the NHS and hospitals and other things. So I've kind of followed that like business line. My sister ripped up the book and went totally different. She's a professional makeup artist, works in film and media, and is with the stars, and she'll probably make way more money and have way more fun than I will in that field, but just so different.
Different brains.
Yeah, it's really nice. Like, when you sit at the dinner table, there's always a different conversation. And, I probably think my world is the most important, and she probably thinks hers is, and it's different. So it's quite exciting.
Okay, one more question then. We've got something else for you to do. So the last question is, what's your most memorable interviewee?
Oh, I've had some. I've had some where I've had no eye contact for 40 minutes, stared out the window and talked. I've had, somewhere I've asked one question and it's never stopped. I've had somewhere people have walked out in tears. It's been interesting. I think the most, the one that probably stands out the most of people I've hired at Tide and been in an interview situation and thought, are you right for this? I don't know. It's not quite there. And then has gone on to really be successful is a girl who worked in our Bulgaria office. She went on to be an ongoing monitoring team leader and then a manager. And she left us a couple of years ago, but like with a really expansive growth. You know, she came out of university with little to no experience. She sat in front of me, was so nervous. I could literally see her shaking with fear. You know, I remember when we gave her the role and the first day I saw her, she was just had a smile from ear to ear because could not believe that we'd given her the job.
Why did you hire her though? She was so nervous. What did you see?
Just it probably back to that point of you give her a chance. And I just really felt she could learn, and I just really felt like I didn't get the full sort of picture of her from the interview. I just felt like there was a lot more that we could uncover. And yeah, look, people have probationary periods and analyst roles and things of that nature. That, you know, it's not to discredit them.
On
yeah,
people,
they're not that. You can't do that much wrong, right?
I always think people, the excuse clients give me when candidates are nervous are, we don't think they'd have strong stakeholder engagement. I'm like, you're like, come on.
Yeah, but you've got to protect them, right? You know, as a leader in a business, if you want people to develop their stakeholder relationships, you need to be the one that helps them and doesn't put them in a position where they're going to fail. And yeah, there's probably 3 or 4 people who have taken through Tide or you know, have moved through Tide and then onto different places who at the time would have thought, there's no way you can present in a boardroom.
Yeah.
There's no way that you can lead a risk and compliance committee or a forum, and they all can. Right, you just got to do it at the right time for them and in a safe space. And yeah, I don't know if we should name names, but the lady who I hired in Bulgaria who went on to another role and to another country, you know, it was just so nice to see her journey, and so nice to see that, you know, the chance we took was well valued.
Worth it, yeah.
And we did that a few times, right? Like I think this is, as I say, you know, Becky really gave me that sort of safe space to sort of take some of those chances. And we've been so lucky, you know, to say that 2 out of the 4 people that we hired 6 years ago as our first financial crime analyst still work in the business.
So lesson to take away, take a chance on people if they don't interview spectacularly.
It was good. And then we've had now our first, what I call boomerang. She will hate me for saying this. Left, came back, now with us again. And yeah, it's nice to see. I think we're in that cycle now as Tide where with that established and the team has been that long that you see people from your network leaving and going on to greater things, or people then returning at a different point with different skill sets. Yeah. So yeah, she's probably like, as I say at Tide, the one that stands out of like where I think we really got it right.
Right. Now, the next question is, so we've got a next guest after you, obviously. His name's Craig Ashby. He's the head of Pago Next Santander. Okay. Head of financial crime. What question would you like to ask him?
So I'm going to reverse the question that I got. So you asked me what financial crime would you get, or what regulation would you get rid of? What regulation would he add?
Use recruiters always for hiring.
What would you put in place as a new regulation? What do you think as a financial crime professional, if they created a regulation, would help?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay. Well, thank you for coming on. It's been fun. And now we can go to the pub.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks.